All right, I've got all of the panels cut, and then I've got all of them sashed with the same kind of, I see this kind of like gold patterned fabric, and they're all sashed with the same size. I did the 3-inch, so it finishes at 2.5. And I'm really happy with the width of that frame on some of the pieces, but I don't love them all the same width. So I am gonna trim some back a little bit. But before I do that, I'm gonna kind of revisit my original thought, because my original thought was to use this fabric as like the background or the wall fabric and have these kind of sporadically placed on this background fabric with, as the wall fabric, and have them kind of like, you know, jaggedly placed like this. But I've run into two problems with that as I tried to lay it out. One, the panels don't have enough size variation for me to fill in the gaps, meaning you kind of have to do this on a bit of a grid. And I can falsify the grid, meaning I can have a grid run through pieces or do halfways and all kinds of things like that and have them offset. The problem or the challenge is that the panels are too much the same size to really get them to lay out in a way that looks sporadic without looking super gridded. But then when you put them in a grid, they're not enough of the same size to really hold the grid shape. So I'm kind of in an odd place where some of them are where there's too many that are too much the same in terms of size and proportion. This is really the only one that's a super different proportion. The bulk of them are very square, and they all came out to be kind of similar sizes in that square. So I only have a couple that are like proportionately different to add some interest to the layout. So I don't think that's how I'm gonna do it. I looked around a little bit. And I saw some pictures of, well, let me show you the original drawing. So this was the original drawing of that kind of sporadic layout. This is drawing is used very loosely here. And this is where I've landed. So I also had this third fabric that I wasn't 100% sure what to do with. It's really super high contrast to everything else, but I like the kind of lightness it brings. And I also like the directionality of it. I was initially thinking about putting this in a grid with more formal sashing and then making these like fussy cut as cornerstones. But again, they're the wrong size for a grid. So they're too close together to kind of spread out or to make sporadic. I would need kind of smaller ones and different proportion ones to fill in corners and gaps and stuff. But if I lay this out like it's a chair rail or a picture rail, you see that, like a picture rail on different pictures where people like put art on a ledge. So I could have the background still be the red, and I could have that white kind of linear be like the ledge or the rail, and then have these like setting on the rail. And I can still kind of make them a little sporadic and uneven. I'm even playing around with how do I kind of like cross over the borders so that, here, I'll show you on this one. So that like if this is the rail here, and this is the wall here, and then this is a fabric or one of the pictures, how do I take like one of these shorter ones, say, let me move this, ooh, I'm all discombobulated, and put it kind of like so that it overlaps a little bit, so that it looks like they're kind of stacked on each other or staggered. I feel like this could really be interesting. The other thing is I had some scrap from a different project. This is from the same line. This is from the Christmas in Town line. And I thought I could make some really interesting, there's some interesting like vignettes that I could fussy cut out of this and kind of frame those to make something super small, so that I could have like, if this was separated from this, I could have this small one kind of in between it and framed in between it to kind of fill in a little bit of the gap. So That's kind of the working plan now. So basically, in order to get these to kind of like line up correctly in this like flat line, I don't need to fuss with how tall each of them are. Instead, I just need to fuss with, from the bottom measurement, what is my maximum measurement? And then I can use my background fabric or my wall fabric to fill in the shorter ones to the maximum measurement. So if this panel, it looks to be about 16 inches tall, and I'm going to put it like on this rail on the bottom, then this panel, which is about 12.5 inches tall, I just need to add the difference right up here, this difference in measurement right here from this wall fabric as a strip to this. And then I can put them as far apart as I want. I can play with the layout later. All I need to do is make this piece as tall as this piece. So I basically need to set the height for each row. If we go back to our thing here, I basically need to set the height for the row and then stick with that. And so I can fill in this, I can make this border or this frame less, like thinner, or leave it thick, and then add up to the maximum height for the row. And once I have the maximum height for the row, then I can start to play with how much gap do I have in between. And I can do that out of this fabric as well. So it becomes something where I kind of put each row together separately, and then put the kind of rail fabric or the sashing fabric or the shelf fabric underneath it. And then I have a row, a row, a row, and I've considered each of them. Yes, I've considered them kind of as a whole composition. Yes, I've considered them as a whole composition, but I've also considered them individually, so that I am not trying to kind of like grid the whole thing like I was in my original idea. So I'm actually really excited about this. I think this is the right way to go. I think it's going to look really, really good in the end, and I'm really excited about using some of this additional ornament fabric. I think there's some really fun kind of little moments in here that I can kind of fussy cut out as little squares and frame to fill in some of the gaps a little bit in the background. So yeah, so that's next. So next what I'm going to do is create my, get my heights. So I'm going to decide which of the panels are going to go together on a row. And then I'm going to make sure they're all the same finished height. No matter how wide I keep the border, I want them all to be the same finished height as each other. And then I can figure out how long my rows can be and cut that first row. So I'm going to figure out my groups of fabric, and then the height, adjust each height, and then we'll come back and kind of do the layout of each row and figure out and talk about how to figure out how much fabric I need in between. So remember, all I'm doing is, like, let's say I trim this sash back. So if I trim this sash back all the way around, but I leave this one the same and these two go on the same row, if I take the taller one's measurement, and then I'm going to just add a chunk of the background fabric to the top of this one to make it the correct height. So the only measurement I care about is the height right now. The width will just land where it lands, and then once that lands somewhere, I can figure out how to lay them out from left to right. So that's next. You know, I started doing this and I realized there were a couple of tips I wanted to make sure I brought up. One is, as you're trimming something that has been sewed and has a seam, especially if it's a long strip, your outside unsewn edge can get really wobbly and off put. So I always measure from my seam line. And you're gonna assume that it's straight. You're gonna cross check that your squares are corners. So you're gonna line up your ruler so that the kind of 90-degree angle is there to support you. And then you're gonna go ahead and trim, but we're gonna trim, like we talked about, from the seam line, not from the cut edge of the fabric, because going through the sewing machine and then being pressed, a lot of times it's gonna get, come out of square, that cut raw edge of fabric. And especially if you're like me and you're not really paying attention to grain line when you're piecing. So I'm not really paying attention to grain line when I'm piecing, not like I should. And so you're gonna really want to watch that and cut from the seam if you're not paying attention to the grain line. The other thing that I wanted to mention is when it comes time, so these 3 pieces are now different heights, and my tallest piece is 18 inches. So for this piece right here, I'm gonna have to add 1, 2 and a quarter. Yep, 2 1/4 to this piece. So don't forget your quilt math when you're cutting a chunk to add to the top of this piece. If you're gonna be measuring from the bottom up and then adding a piece, don't forget to sink a 1/2 inch into your seam. Why? Because it's a 1/4 inch seam allowance for 2 pieces of fabric, and 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch plus 1/4 inch equals a 1/2 inch. So if I'm gonna have to cut this at 2 1/4, if I want this to finish or to show at 2 1/4, I actually have to cut that a 1/2 inch longer, so 2 3/4. And then when I sew that on, that 1/2 inch will disappear into the seam. And you'll notice that it's not a 1/2 inch of just the fabric that I'm sewing. There's also a 1/4 inch of this fabric going. So in essence, my 2 3/4 will pull this down to this 2 1/2, right? And then that 1/4 inch will disappear into the thing or into the seam. So don't forget your quilt math when you're doing this. I would be very frustrated indeed if I cut this at 2 1/4 and then I went to attach it and I would have lost a 1/2 inch. So this would be a 1/2 inch short. Do not forget your quilt math, and don't forget to calculate in for your seams, because that can be very, very frustrating during improv. The other thing is, yes, I will likely be adding some buffer to the top of these, but I am gonna get some buffer, meaning another strip of the background fabric, because as we saw in the picture, even the top one doesn't hit exactly. So basically what I'm doing right now, if you were looking at this, is I'm imagining a line right here, and then I am compensating for this piece. So I'm making this piece, and then I'm making this piece. And then I'm figuring out how to lay them out and how much distance goes in between. And once I have them together left to right, then I can add a piece above to represent the wall above it before the next chair rail, or picture rail. So really, as I'm breaking this down, I found like you can find where your verticals and your horizontals line up, so that you can make a piece, then go on to the next step. So I could make these 2 pieces for the panels I selected for this rail, and then figure out how much distance between them. If I want something else here, all of those decisions can come later. But first I can make this decision. And with improv, it's really kind of nice to be able to break down your decisions into really small steps, so that you can decide, yes, I want that panel, I want the border to stay wide, but that other one, I want to make it much narrower, and I like the difference in how that looks. So this was my biggest or my tallest piece for this row, but all of a sudden I trimmed off the frame, and now this is my tallest piece. Do you see? So when I trimmed off the frame on this one, now it's even shorter, and this one now needs the most background up here. So as I'm building this, I'm making these decisions kind of in micro moments along the way. I'm not like making sweeping decisions. And you can see how I had one idea. I executed this first step of that idea, and then I realized that idea wasn't tenable. It wasn't going to work. I wasn't liking where it was going. So I shifted my idea, and I can do that without changing the things that I've already done, because I only did a couple of steps into that idea, and then I reevaluated. So at every stage, I'm reevaluating. Do I still like this? Is something not feeling right? is the proportions not sitting right? What's happening with this? Where can I bring that in? And then the whole time in the back of my head, I'm thinking, where can I use this? Do I want to use this? Do I not want to use this? How can I use this? So, so as we're going here and as you're kind of doing improv, you have to kind of like, it's a really active brain thing. This is not mindless sewing. The mindless part comes later when you're just kind of like executing on, like putting on the borders for all the panels, for example, was mindless. But now I'm really having to think my way through this. So it's really not, it's not mindless at this stage, that's for sure. So that's what I'm going to do, but I wanted to make sure to remind you that you're going to measure your trim from the sewn or the seamed edge, and that you don't want to forget your quilt math and just sink a 1/2 inch into the seams when you're adding pieces to a specific measurement. All right, I've got one together. I'm taking a similar tack with the total width as I did with the panels themselves, meaning I'm going to just put the ones together that I want in a row together, and I'm not going to add anything to the sides to get the total width yet, because I don't know how big all three, you know, the pieces are actually different sizes, so I don't know how big all three are going to be, and I might want them to kind of like, for balance's sake, I might want to make it look like the pictures are sitting kind of to the left on the shelf, or to the right on the shelf. We'll see kind of what looks and feels balanced, but this is the row for now. So again, I will be adding more of this background fabric up here. I just don't know how much yet. I'll be adding more on the right and the left. I just don't know how much yet. And then I'll be adding this like shelf fabric down along the bottom. But again, I just don't know how much yet. So what's nice about this is I can do this step, do these 3 rows, and then assess the next thing, which would be the finalizing the width so that all 3 rows are the same width. So right now, all I'm dealing with is the height of the panels, and then setting them in a way that they make a uniform strip, even though the panels are different heights. Making it so that they're all the same height, and then I'm putting them in a strip. Once that's done for all 3, then I can decide on the total width of the strip. So right now I'm dealing with the height, then I will deal with the width, and then I will deal with the kind of placement in that width. So that's what I mean when I say micro decisions. You're going to make these small choices, execute on them all the way through, and then move on. So if your brain is kind of I want to finish each strip to its completion before moving on to the next one, if that's how your brain likes to think, this is going to be a challenge for you, because I can't finish this one. If I go to finish this and add what I think would be an appropriate size on either side, I'm just going to end up ripping that out. So the way to do improv without like ripping and redoing and ripping and redoing is to do these kind of like small decisions along the way. And then see where the next step takes you. And once you have, you've kind of built on those, you'd be amazed how fast a top comes together when you're making these decisions one at a time.